Catholic Lunch. It's a home stretch here on Friday the 13th, and we have all the way from somewhere in the U.S. Ted Ryan is here. Dr. Ted Ryan, is it?
Yes,
Isn't it,
yes.
Ted?
Well, yes. Well, Ted is a nickname I'll give you for Edward.
Edward,
and
of course.
Now that you've brought it up, I'll continue if you don't mind.
Sure.
There are 3 official nicknames for Edward in the English language.
Okay.
One is Ed.
Uh-huh.
One is Ted,
Uh-huh.
and one is Ned.
Ned?
Oh,
Ned.
really?
I didn't know about the
Never
Ned.
heard
Yes,
about
we're
that
learning.
one.
Correct. My uncle, I had an uncle Ned, who was actually originally from Scotland. So Ned is more common in Scotland. Ted, like Ted Kennedy, no other connection, thank goodness there. But he was Edward Kennedy, so that's very common in Ireland. And Ed is very common pretty much in the States. So those are so I'm Ted rather than Ed or Ned. And
That's great. We have Nikole-Bélanger joining us here too, Nikole. It's always great to have you
Friday
here.
the 13th.
Exactly.
Yes. Do you think it's a lucky day too?
Amazing.
Really?
I love them.
well,
yes,
you know,
it's a challenging day for everybody,
Yeah.
but it's a good day.
At least it's Friday, right?
It's a good day.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by
This is-
amazing
this
people,
is-
so it's
well,
a good day.
it's good to have the positive joie de vivre because you know you're a mystic, Hildegard. You know the 13th goes back to the Jacques de Molay of the Templar Knights, as you know, who met a very untimely end in Notre Dame Cathedral.
Well, this is a whole different
Notre
story.
Dame
We could
Cathedral,
certainly
yeah.
talk about that one.
But that is since it's Friday the 13th.
However,
Yeah.
let me just understand here. You have an interesting project. You have a background actually in criminology. You've done a lot of things in your life. You're also interested in helping university students to connect with industry. And of course, Nikole has a consultant business in environmental background.
Yes,
and
indeed.
very much a businesswoman of your own right.
Yeah.
And what you brought to us today is your Francesco Project, which we are really, really interested in hearing about it. So why don't you just take it away, how the two
Yes.
of you connect, and what is it that you are up to now since you're retired from criminology?
Well, what happened about 9 months ago, I was invited here by my friends and colleagues in Toronto, whom I've done some work with over the last decade. And there was a visiting mayor from Assisi, Italy, Mayor Risi. He had just retired from being mayor for 20 years. And I believe he had always had at least 70% of the vote. So he was a very successful, kind of savvy politician. And he was on his way to the United Nations, stopping here in Toronto, Canada, with an exhibit from his city of the manuscripts and artifacts and other historical connections to St. Francis of Assisi. And so we were able to have a prolonged conversation with him while he was here. Jack Lenz was the producer in Toronto, who invited me to the home of another gentleman in the Italian community involved in real estate construction and so forth. And we had this long talk. And I was very impressed by this mayor, because what he said is, what I would like to do is to take the legacy of my city, of St. Francis, and apply that legacy to the 21st century. And then he specified what he meant by how do you do that? What are you going to focus on? Not so much mysticism, which, as you know, is something St. Francis was very
Well, yeah,
involved
maybe
with.
we could just quickly let our audience know who may not be familiar with the Catholic saint St. Francis of Assisi.
Yes.
He became known for speaking to birds and animals and felt that God speaks through everything and everybody, if I recall this correctly.
Yeah, he was
Right.
very much integrated with, well, it was mainly, correct, he was very close to nature, close to animals, and communicating with, supposedly with birds, and as many that they could understand him and so forth. But it was also an emphasis on greed and materialism. So his emphasis was on poverty, and the Franciscan order, which he developed in his name, to this day is a very powerful religious order which emphasizes that, mainly alternatives to materialism and greed, and to embrace, I guess, well, in certain Catholic circles, they would, I'm not representing them, but they would refer to that as radical poverty.
Okay, so
That-
this is
that
typical for the Franciscan order.
Yes, for the Franciscan
Radical.
order.
Yes.
Now, the mayor of Assisi is a modern, successful politician, so he's not recommending that we commune or speak with the birds. He's not. But he is recommending that we look at what's going on economically now, 2015, environmentally now, and that's what we were discussing here, particularly with Nikole and
Yes.
her work with Al Gore and the Sustainable Development Initiatives and documentaries at some length, and which we'll continue with, and conflict, because St. Francis also went out, distinguished himself in terms of reaching out to the Muslim community during the time of the Crusades and trying to build peace, actually going and seeing a Muslim leader and talking about peace. So those three areas of the economy, the environment, and conflict and war.
But this is the area that the Pope is walking right now.
Well put. When we had the correct, the encyclical Laudato
Yes.
Si directs specifically, deals with those issues, and most of
Huge.
all the economy and the environment and how they're linked. And so that this becomes a issue of a ethical nature, of a moral nature, of a religious nature, and for those who may not be religious, of a spiritual, metaphysical aspect. In other words, a requirement for people to address at a higher level in order to deal with the problems that are not being dealt with. So I was impressed by this and decided to do whatever I could as a criminologist from my academic background
Yes.
to contribute by developing new linkages with perhaps new ways to have students involved in projects that could contribute to dealing with the problems, overcoming the problems of the environment, economy, and also war, these major questions. So my background is though my background is not political science or diplomacy, but my background has been criminology. So in particular, it's a narrow background, but it has immense implications.
And it's tied in with those other three things, because I would think that crime is tied to the economy, to the environment,
Yes.
and all these
The
war, all these larger issues.
The
Yeah.
Pope just finished to do the equivalent of the Ten Commandments for the environment. And it's published. It's amazing.
Thou shalt not pollute. Know what I'm saying?
Well, let's ask Teddy for a moment. Having been in this field of criminology, so what is it, from your perspective, that makes a human being do something that the rest of society would consider be wrong or criminal, and then implies certain punishment, if you so will?
As I really, that's you, I said I really like Hildegard's questioning because it's so different, and I appreciate it. It's very good and an important point. Well, in dealing in criminology, it's based primarily upon social science measurement. Well, they call that in philosophy, in reference to your question, it would be British empiricism, which has influenced English-speaking countries immensely, in particular the United States and Canada. And in America, it's called logical positivism. And what that means very simply is that you have to prove what you're saying. So that you are focused, particularly in criminology in graduate school, you are focused on measurement, data, and proof. Okay. And that obviously is important, and particularly in the hard sciences, like forensic science, it's extremely important because amazing things have been done with hard science proof. But when you're dealing with people, your question, and their minds, that's different. And there are many things that are left out that you can't measure. So when I finished my PhD in criminology, which was heavily empirical and measurement, and I felt rather frustrated, actually. I told my committee I felt I was being overly structured in terms of statistical measurement, and they sort of, at the end, agreed with me and allowed me to start to look beyond measurement. So I went to Europe at that time and started to look at conflicts. And so I would find groups that actually were becoming terrorist groups, and some of them were terrorist groups at that time. And this is before the what we're dealing with now, Islamic. It was more left-wing groups like Action Direct and Baader-Meinhof.
I was going to say, I had it in my mind.
Baader-Meinhof, yes, and other groups. So these were leftists primarily, and some and a few rightists as well. But the leftists were the ones that were the most dangerous, particularly in your country, Germany, because they were killing people, as you know, whereas the right-wing Nazi were basically destroying property and putting bombs in certain buildings, but they weren't really killing people the way the left was killing people. So I would go out of my way to find these people and to interview them. Because to understand, and I was able to get access to them because I would say, well, look, I'm not representing a government. I don't work for any government. I'm not an agent of any intelligence. I'm an academic. I'm a professor. Here's my card, and I've heard bad things about you. I've heard some very bad things about you and your group, but I'm open. I'm an analyst. I want to understand the full situation, and I don't understand the full situation. Would you be willing to explain it to me?
Yeah, so you listen to their perspective.
So I actually at times brought into meetings and in basements and so forth with the leaders, and 3 or 4 hours I would get lectures, and they'd explain to me why they were doing what they were doing. So it occurred to me afterwards that this is something, as you can't measure this. So this is not something you can put in a computer program. And what is it? It's I called it a criminal rationality. So the area of rationality, criminal rationality, how you think, and rationalization, how you justify your thinking, is crucial to understanding ultimate crime. Not basically who's shoplifting at the Eaton Center here or something, but who's going to do away with you or something, you say, and yet who feels that this is very good. This is the right thing to do. So I became very much aware of the role of rationality and thinking, and which also involved in ultimate criminality, metaphysics. Metaphysics meaning a higher frame of reference. You mentioned St. Francis, you mentioned your name, Hildegard, and the mystic, and how important this is, and how it's been ignored, particularly in the educational system. And I'm a product of the educational system, so I felt that I was not exposed to what was actually the higher real cause of what was going on until I could get in contact and understand and listen to these people. And what struck me very often, particularly in Germany, in your country, how well educated and how intelligent, if you remember, they were. I mean, these were not street thugs out to not hit somebody in the head and take their money. These were people who were extremely well read. They would throw questions at me about Das Kapital and the Manifesto, and they had analyzed this, and they were very well read, highly, highly intelligent, but also capable of ultimate criminality at the highest degree, because they would kill people with impunity, as you know. There.
So the question I have is, we're talking about a couple of different things here. We're talking about the individual criminal mind, where I just feel justified doing something for whatever the reason, and then we have these ideology, people who share the same ideology, and they want to impose their worldview maybe on others, and then use illegal means to accomplish that end. What I want to find out from you is, what is your take on what causes, if I may even call it that, but what triggers a human being to do hurt another, to actually do something, not just criminal, but let's stick to really corporal damage. What could actually in the psyche go wrong, or is it something that goes wrong? What makes a person tick that ends up murdering somebody to begin with?
Well, there are different kinds of, for example, people in the mental health professions. And that's important, I understand. In Canada, too, you have the Mrs. Justin's mother, I was told,
Margaret,
very active in mental, and that's very important. The studies have shown in criminology that about 20% of offenders people committing offense against other people would have a serious mental emotional pathology. 20%.
A pathology or a disturbed moment or a disturbed period?
Yes, a disturbance of a significant degree, not necessarily equating with insanity, or not necessarily equating with psychosis, which is an inability to deal with time, place, or reality. They're even a smaller group of maybe 5% or something like that, perhaps. But the 20% would encompass all of the mental emotional pathologies that you're dealing with. People have difficulties dealing with their lives and what's happening to them, and they can't control themselves.
So circumstantial, somebody doesn't know how life goes on, lost a job or lost a wife or some trauma, and it kind of blows all the fuses, and they do something that they normally wouldn't do, and that then results in a crime?
They do things that becomes, and for some of them, it becomes their part of their normal abnormality. In other words, is their way of sort of living and getting by. And but the point is, the studies that have been done over many years by social psychologists, the psychologists themselves, only would indicate maybe 20% would have this categorization. Now, with the drug addiction that we have and the spread of heroin that we have in North America, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm a criminologist, I would agree with them and say it might even be more. It might even be now up to 25% or 30% that it's growing. But that still leaves the majority in a different category. Say, when I would go to prisons, for example, and when I was a professor, I'd have interns working in various places, including prisons, and I'd go and visit them, and I'd talk to the people in criminology, and I'd say, how many of your inmates here would fall into this mental emotional pathology category of mental illness? And they'd say, oh, at most, 1 out of 20 or 5%. That they didn't want to acknowledge that. I noticed that most of the prisons I went to, unless it was connected with a hospital or something, they would diminish that. So I'm disagreeing with my criminological colleagues in that sense, and agreeing with the psychologist and the psychiatrist about this. However, even so, going up to say 30%, you still have the majority that it doesn't apply to. Now, the implications of that are very significant. If you have a multi-billion-dollar treatment agency premised on psychology, which is built upon pathology, yet 70% at least, even by the psychologists say they don't fall into this category, that they don't fall into the category, yet you're hiring people with those degrees to deal with this problem, that means you're going to fail the majority of times, and you're going to waste billions of dollars, and you do. Mm-hmm. Now, if you say this, you get opposition. I went to Montreal, I was at a violence conference many years ago, and said this. And I looked at the responses we get because they surveyed the responses coming back. 3 out of 4 of the psychiatrists agreed. 1 out of 2 of the clinical psychologists agreed. But only 1 out of 4 of the social workers agreed. And I have nothing against social workers. My sister's a social worker in New York, and a very good one, by the way, and it's a very important place for social work, and we need more of it. So I'm not speaking against social work or mental health professionals at all. But what I interpreted this, looked at the economics. The people who made the most income, the psychiatrists who were MDs, were the most secure. So they weren't looking for more business, you say. In fact, just the opposite. Many of the psychiatrists, and I wrote about this for a group of psychology, would say to us criminologists, don't send us your problems. Don't send us your moral problems. These are not clinically sick people medically. They are people with problems, moral problems, problems in thinking, various kinds of problems, but they're not medical cases. So get them out of this hospital, you say. So the psychiatrists didn't want them. Half of the psychologists said yes and half no, and most of the social workers wanted them. But the salary scale, psychiatrists first, clinical psychologists to the middle, social workers last. So the people making the least amount of money were the most likely to categorize a person as mental emotional pathological, which means it's somebody that they would treat and deal with. So I think there is an economic connection. I'm not a Marxist, but there's an economic connection here in terms of self-interest and how you analyze data. So they asked me, the American Psychotherapy Association asked me to write a book for them on forensic counseling. They had come up with this name, but they didn't know what it was. So they called me because I had written about therapeutic justice in the States, mainly. Therapy is sometimes used as an alternative to justice, unfortunately. So you're misusing justice and you're misusing therapy, both. So they said, well, we want to develop more forensic counseling, but we don't know what it is. They were saying that. So I said, all right, I know what it is, and I'll write a book for you. So I wrote a book for them on forensic counseling. And that book goes back to your point. Namely, in dealing with forensic counseling, with the exception of those who are pathological, and some of them are psychotic, which would go to a psychiatrist, some of them mental emotional pathologies would go to a clinical psychologist, and some of them have other mental disturbances which would go to social workers emotionally to help them with anxiety and help them live. Yes, but still, they're the minority altogether. So a majority of offenders are in a separate category completely, where you're dealing with the mind and you're dealing with rationality. And then you get back to your question: why do these people, some people are the worst murderers in history have been those often very intelligent and very well educated. World War II, international socialism in the Soviet Union, Marxism, National Socialism in Germany, the Third Reich. Okay? These were socialisms with actually metaphysics. You could meet people, to this day, we've had an exchange program with Russian professors. To this day, some of them got mad at me once because we had a program together to make some profit, and I got more of the money, and they didn't like it, and they thought I was a capitalist, and it was this Marxist way of thinking. But the point is, to this day, you have people who will justify ultimate criminality. But what I tried to represent with the word that you asked me about here, chosenness, spelt with an I rather than E, they will justify it in the name of good. So the reason people can eliminate millions of other people, and by the way, the Soviets eliminated more innocent people than the Nazis did. We know, Stalin killed more people than Hitler. That's not justified, reducing the criminality here, because it was immense on the part of both of those socialist systems, international socialism, Marxism, and National Socialism, Germany. But in all cases there, you had manifesto, you had ideology, and you had extremely well-educated and intelligent people who could justify what they were doing. And when I would speak to some of these spin-off groups of leftists in Western Europe at that time, they were very, very, most of them were leftists. There were a few on the right here and there, but as you know, they're less tolerated, so you don't get to them that easily. And they're often not as well-educated, by the way, as the leftists are, from my experience. But you would see an emphasis on good. In other words, ironically, the worst bad or evil proceeds from an ideology and metaphysic built around ultimate good. And if you look back in history, you see it as well. For example, you see it in the Inquisition. You see it in religious persecutions. So on that basis, I put together a word: chosenness. Changing the E to an I as the sinful choice of choosing one God, if you're religious, or an extra O, G-O-D, if you're secularist, Marxist or a National Socialist or whatever, or a capitalist. Laissez-faire capitalism is one I add in there with communism, Nazism, and laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire, which is what neoliberal capitalism is, and how it's destroying our environment and exploiting people worldwide and creating wars from Ukraine to Syria to you name it, and Latin America, and we get into all of that. But where does that stem from? That stems from a metaphysic, and it's a personal metaphysic where an individual says, well, this is ultimate good. Marxism is ultimate good. National Socialism, Mein Kampf, is ultimate good. Laissez-faire capitalism is ultimate good. My movement, whatever it is, for national separatism is ultimate good. ETA in Spain or whatever. So I can kill people for this ultimate good. And so that the rationality that is often associated with the greatest form of ultimate criminality is not some bad person, the devil image with the horns and the pitchfork, and I'm going to do terrible things. But no, I am going to do very good things for the proletariat, for the Aryan race, for
the greater common good,
the common
in the
good,
sense of religious persecution,
or freedom of so-called free trade, which means what I interpret in neoliberal capitalism, the freedom to be unfree in one freedom.
Right.
In other words, if you're only free to conform to one system of supposedly a global free trade, and is that free? No. So you're free, but to be unfree in one named free system, which is unfree. So we have this basically metaphysic ideology that people directly subscribe to or indirectly accept, and again, it's based upon something that is the ultimate, or in the case of capitalism, the inexorable good. In other words, they don't see an alternative. There is, but they don't see it. So that explains the immense amount of ultimate criminality. And when so you cannot assume, the biggest mistake is because somebody's a criminal, that they're stupid. So you can't assume that because somebody's doing bad things, that they're basically sick people. So crime is not a sickness. There are some criminals who are sick, but most of them aren't. So the whole concept of treating crime with psychologists as a sickness is basically destined to fail. So it doesn't mean you can treat. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try to treat. You can, but if you start with the wrong premise because you don't understand the rationalities involved, then you fail.
Well, then I was first going to ask them, what do you do? But then I was thinking that may be the case. But are there other reasons for crime? Like some people might have this chosenness where they're actually doing it for good, but there might be somebody who's creating a different kind of crime for maybe economic reasons, or. So would you not have to understand what the motive of the crime is to then design an appropriate treatment or approach?
Yes, it has to be, yes. And the major point is it's not one quick fix or simple answer to crime because people are complex, so there are complex factors, reasons for crime. So it's a matter of doing the correct, analysis and making the correct distinctions. So yes, there are people who I grew up in the Bronx, New York City. Actually, John Gotti over there, Joe Valachi north of me, and so forth, and La Casa Nostra and so forth. So I grew up, I would say, among some people who looked upon crime as kind of normal, and that's what you have to do. And it's a rough world out there, and it's a way of life. And unfortunately, for many people, due to our neoliberal economy, which outsources manufacturing to the cheapest places one can find in the planet, so that the CEO and the stockholder value can make more profit, so that the average CEO, I understand now, in most of the major multinationals, is making over 300 times what the average worker makes in that company, whereas 30 years ago they made 60 times, now they're making over 300 times. So the word goes out about greed. You see the need of the St. Francis counter, that greed is good, and that therefore if you can't get it one way, you will get it illegally, then you will take it illegally. So that's not necessarily a metaphysic, it's a coping mechanism. So we need to have more forensic social work, and we need to have more health, economic reform, definitely. But even with that, you still cannot escape the fact that there will be those people who will pursue ultimate crime, and the best aid and a better of ultimate crime is an ideology and a metaphysic where they define good according to their premises, which are not the same as, say, our premises. So in case of Marx, in case of Adolf Hitler, in case of distortion of Adam Smith, because Adam Smith really didn't recommend the kind of capitalism that we have now, contrary to people quoting him.
Well, talk about false premise, okay?
Yeah.
So what if, and I want to have your take on consciousness and states of consciousness impacting on how an individual functions, and based on my lack of awareness or lack of consciousness, I'll be flashed along the river with growing up in the Bronx, socioeconomic circumstances. I don't have an opportunity to maybe even fight against it because, as you said, it's a way of life.
Or survival.
Could it be that a lot of people who get on the quote-unquote wrong path, and I really don't like to use these words, I don't like good, bad judgment, because I think the universe is a construct of self-regulating mechanisms. Could there be a direct connection between the manipulation of consciousness of those who have, leading them believe into inferiority versus they are superior, they know better? I'm just thinking of the Piscean age is all about follow the leader. For 2,100 years we were to be told what to do. We needed to have a leader. And it appears many people now who hit a brick wall, they could have been in jail for murder and then turn around after they do their time and bring out
Messiah.
Something. Absolutely. They create a new business. They do good. They volunteer. They make millions
because
in a different way.
And
they do not take the 300% mark up, you know. They actually share the profits. I forget the gentleman who ran in the U.S. Who was it? He was running for the Green Party way back when. Not that he was a mass murderer, I forget the name. But he was a corporate executive and he felt he couldn't do this greed anymore. And a very interesting man also was working on Wall Street, turned around and has now in California helping young families to attain healthy foods. And they had a shift in consciousness. Their awareness popped and they did a 360. So the question is our behavior that is so rude, is so disregarding to the planet and each other on some level, part of our lack of access to the consciousness we need as human beings?
Well,
to be harmonious and peaceful? Is there hope from that
we're
end?
entering the Aquarius age, and I think that the level of consciousness is really opening. Everybody who were not working on the greed level were underground. Right now, they all raising up. So we're going to have conflict before we're going to enter the peace or, equilibrium, because the raising up and the greed is still there. So we're going to have some clashes.
Because the masses don't buy into that domination anymore. They see behind the political
it's going to be an
games
adaptation, and this is what we are living right now. And I'm comfortable because I understand what it's coming. So greed will be out and green will come in. And green, it's not just a color anymore, but it's a way of life.
So do you, Nikole, do you see this equal?
Right?
You are correct, and I agree 100%.
We're not there completely yet, but we're on our way. And surely we're not backing out anymore. And we're not going underground anymore. We're going to stay there, and we're going to take our place.
So the green people have a unity consciousness? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yes.
They have an awareness
Absolutely.
of you are being a part of me?
This is not just about us.
You.
It's not about you and I and Dr. Ryan. It's not about us anymore.
Yeah.
It's about our children. It's about what it's out there. The young generation
that needs to be
who won't deal with this. They don't want to be like us. They don't want to go what we went through to come to this level.
And think about it. Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying, talking about the Baader-Meinhof and all that. And you don't see that anymore. We had it in Canada. You had it in the States, the weather underground, that kind of stuff.
You had in Quebec, remember PL?
We will.
And the anti-terrorism.
We don't see that anymore. We don't see it in the U.S. We don't see it in Canada. We don't see it in Europe.
No.
Right?
However, what we do see now is that new kids come in with a consciousness fully alive, totally negating
the
what they see
ADD,
out there.
ADHD, the crystal children, they don't go for this.
Yeah.
So because of that, David Suzuki was in the city about a month or two months ago, and that's what he says. I should retire, but I cannot afford to retire because of my grandchildren, because of my children. I still want to do so much work. It still needs to be done, but we're getting closer and closer every day. So
Listen,
this is
guys,
amazing.
We, we don't have a lot of time here.
How much time we got?
Dad,
I'm used to giving hour lectures, in the university. That's a problem.
I hate to interrupt you.
Well, I don't know. Anyways, but maybe you can summarize because you're here.
Well,
and, you're not in Toronto every day, but leave us with something.
Indeed.
Well, I
Indeed.
basically.
The Francesco Project.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I am hoping that the Francesco Project can meet what Nikole was talking about in terms of the social consciousness, and because it is geared towards these issues that we all agree upon or need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Environment and economy and war. However, I was invited to speak about this at Rome in a metaphysics conference, and one of the Catholic theologians there said, "Well, you sound a bit Manichaean," and which is good and bad. And I hadn't heard that word in 40 years because I was a professor in the state university system, but I wanted to think back at Jesuit kind of analysis of heresy. Manichaeism.
Hildegard is good as heresy, She walked to the Pope and said, "Hey, dude, everybody has a channel up high. What the heck are you doing? You're killing off all these people to build buildings. Give them their food back."
And the mayor of
11th
Italy
century.
said the same thing almost happened to Francis as well, as a heretic rather than as a saint. But the Jesuit definition is interesting. The concept is heresy is an overemphasis on a forgotten truth. That's an interesting analysis. Overemphasis of a forgotten truth. Now, the heretic, in which case would be Protestants, would be considered heretics and Manichaeans, would say, well, wait a second, just leave out the over, and we agree with you. We're emphasizing a truth that you have forgotten about. So what Nikole is saying, which is correct, it is 100% is the only answer analytically. However, I'm afraid I may be closer to Manichaeism and Calvinism than I would like to be, in the sense I don't have immense confidence in our being able to change this very soon. You was talking about we don't have these, we had Occupy and so forth, but they're no longer around.
And they're not violent either.
And they're not violent. But I'm not recommending violence at all, but I'm recommending nonviolence. But I don't see that succeeding, unfortunately, as much as I would like to see it succeed. I don't. I'm being honest. I don't see it, at least in our generation, even though I agree with the solution, as you, Nikole, enunciated and you asked it. So I don't see it, unfortunately. Consciousness, yes, but consciousness does go back to good and evil, because if there is something ultimately evil, how can you counter it without something that's ultimately good?
Well,
that's my question.
This is where the premise might need to change. We had a gentleman sit here a couple of weeks ago saying, when you're really in tune with who you are, there is no distinction anymore, good and evil. It's understanding yourself as being the toe. Everybody is a part of the whole. My little toe is equally important as yours. So a person really can shift in awareness to a point that they identify with all that is, which then automatically disarms them. They cannot do the things like the woman who sat here. She couldn't do the bison business anymore. She had to turn vegan. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, and that is...
Oh yeah, we need to wrap it up.
The question is, though,
in a practical
how many
way.
people can do that? I hope more, but I don't know.
It only takes one bad apple to spoil the whole bunch.
Yes.
And that's the issue. Unless everybody does that, you got one bad apple.
But it takes one good apple to change
it
the level of consciousness.
Exactly. So that's where maybe we can end on.
I'm an optimist.
One bad apple could spoil the batch, and one good apple may be inspiring the whole thing due to the quantum field reality, right?
Yeah, the quantum field reality.
And what we're talking about in terms of what's wrong, evil, crime, I see that as a virus. Now, viruses expand very quickly and very easily, and the antidote doesn't. So I see what we're talking about. The remedy is correct. The correct consciousness is the right medicine. But the ailment is a virus in human nature. And this is where I think, I'm not all the way mad, they have a point here. Not everything in human nature is good or wonderful. So if you're communing with all of yourself, I don't see that as the solution, because you may be fine, but some other people who are communing with what's in them, things may come out that are not fine at all, like National Socialism, International Socialism, laissez-faire capitalism, extremism, and it does come out. So I see the crime being a virus in effect, and it expands more quickly than correct social consciousness, which sort of is overwhelmed by the virus. And I did say I would be pessimistic, so I have to apologize.
That's okay.
And your foundation would help at which level?
Well, basically educational. I see it as educational, which also, good question, has to be cultural. I had a colleague of mine, a retired Japanese professor who survived Hiroshima, in the outskirts of Hiroshima, actually. And she said something that was very interesting. She said, in Japan, if you make 300 times more, have Toyota or Honda or Mitsubishi or Subaru, whatever, Hitachi, these companies, if you make what Americans, CEOs, make, and other parts of the world as well, if you make 300 times more with the average workers instead of maybe 40 or 50, you lose face in your society. You are a dishonorable person. Now, I know the CEO rates in Germany were very similar to Japan. Now, but the more that neoliberalism expands, you have the 0.001 percenters making 300-400 times what the average worker makes, and that is something that has expanded. It hasn't contracted.
Okay.
So that's the problem.
But in your country, there are corporations who actually shift that around as well. That's a good news.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to stop
we're
here.
Wrapping it up. We're going to go solve these problems after the show's over. What do you mean, really?
We have to cut
That's
this.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I got to cut this. I'll leave. You guys can continue, and we'll figure out how to pick Chris
We're
extra.
starting a new group here,
You know what I'm saying?
non-violent, to oppose the ruling establishment.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
How can people who want to join the discussion get in touch with you? Do you want people to get in touch with you?
Yes, my email. Or you can also write here to you and yourself and
contact that channel.
Yeah.
And
Well, we got the
Trust
email
that
right
channel
up there,
as well.
so
There
people
you
can
are.
get in touch with you there, Dr. Ed, and
Awesome.
we also put Nicole's info up there so that people know how to get in touch with Nicole, and of course you can always get in touch with
And
us
feel
here.
free to contact
Thatchannel.com. We're all here, and we'll do this again, Ted. I know you're in Toronto periodically. You got to come back and get Nicole back on anytime she wants, and of course Hildegard will be here next Friday. This has been Liquid Lunch. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Have a great
Peace.
weekend.
Peace.
And it's Friday 13.
And the 13th.
Awesome.
Yeah.